This is the Art of Network Engineering podcast. In this podcast, we'll explore tools, technologies, and talented people. We aim to bring you information that will expand your skill sets and toolbox and share the stories of fellow network engineers.
Welcome to the Art of Network Engineering. I am Tim Bertino at Tim Bertino on Twitter, and I am joined this evening by Lexi Cooper at Track It Pacer on Twitter. What's happening, Lexi?
Hey, Tim. Not a whole lot going on. It was just the 4th of July recently, so everything is like chill and very hot, and I am chill. And I don't have AC in my house, so that's fun. Yeah, that's where my brain is at right now. It's just
no
the
AC.
Temperature.
Oh my.
Yeah, well, okay. Technically, one room in my house has like a window unit, but that's it. So it's been fun in Seattle summer. I don't know.
I don't think you did it on purpose. But when you said it was the 4th of July and everything's chill, you kind of put your hands in front of the camera. And I just saw that as you're talking about the 4th of July and we were making sure you had all 10 fingers.
Yeah. You know what, though? I definitely did not have any danger this 4th of July because my neighborhood, instead of doing fireworks, did a drone show, which to me sounded super lame. But, well, I thought it'd be super lame. But it wasn't. It was actually really, really neat. And I like it better than fireworks now because it was like quiet. Like it wasn't the scary fireworks noises, but it was also like, they had like a soundtrack, like, I don't know, it was like 80s rock songs, but it's so cool. They did like 3D like animations of like, the Liberty Bell and the Statue of Liberty. And
really?
There was like an eagle that flapped its wing. It was awesome. It was very cool. So I highly recommend drone shows for your special occasions. How was your holiday, Tim?
Great. We spent it on my wife's parents' farm, and they've got the whole thing of, so my father-in-law used to work for the city in this small town, and at one point years ago, he literally came home. The city or the town playground got all new playground equipment, so he brought home one of those like tall sheet metal death trap slides that we all remember from the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And hooked a hose up to it in their backyard that slopes at like a perfect angle downhill. And there's like this big water slide in their backyard on the farm. So that's been like a 4th of July tradition for the last, 10 plus years. But
that's awesome. That sounds like a great time. I'm kind of jealous. Like it's been a while since I've done water sports. even slip and slide type things. That's cool.
That's awesome.
And I don't get too much into the fireworks anymore, which makes things a ton safer. So that's good.
It's good. And less scary for children and dogs.
And dogs. Yep, exactly. So we did already have a question in the chat from Zetharian, but are you on Threads? That's a new thing now.
Oh my gosh.
The next Twitter competitor. I haven't had a chance to talk to you about it yet, Lexi. What are your thoughts?
I know. Oh my God.
Don't do it.
Tim.
Don't do it.
Tim, I'm so tired. I'm just so tired.
Right.
I'm so tired. So I'm on everything. I'm on everything except for Threads and Snapchat. And Facebook. Okay. Those are the 3 things, but I am on Blue Sky. I am on Mastodon. I guess and I'm on the actual Twitter, right? So like, and Instagram and YouTube and Twitch and all the blah, blah, blah. And I am so tired of opening up accounts and then reposting because there's not a single program that everybody's closing down their stupid APIs, right? So everybody's either charging exorbitant amounts of money to get to their APIs or they're just not allowing people to do it at all. So there's not like a single program that can post on all these things. And it's a freaking nightmare. Like I'm not doing it. And I'm not doing it. Never say never, but I'm not going to.
Where's the Roku of social media anymore? But like you said, your point with the APIs.
Before before every CEO decided they're going to charge $5 million a month to access their stupid APIs, like they were there. That software was there, run by volunteers, a lot of it, but no, not anymore. So it doesn't exist. And that's my soapbox.
Yep. It could be all different next week. We can have the same.
Are you on Threads, Tim?
Chat.
Are you going to do it?
No, I just heard what it was this morning. So no.
It's Instagram, but not.
Yeah.
Is it Instagram or is it Twitter? Because it's run by Meta.
It's run by Meta. So I think
it's
Twitter? It's similar to Twitter, but it's tied to your Instagram account. So
I've heard there's a lot of issues.
And then if you want to get rid of your Threads account, you have to delete your Instagram account. It's the same.
Very bad.
Yeah.
Bad. So bad. Anyway,
so
good luck, everybody.
Before we get into potential social media CEO cage matches, because that'll be a whole completely different episode.
Yeah.
Let's get into our topic this evening. We are going to discuss something called media networking. And we have brought on Josh Warcop to discuss this topic. Josh, can you introduce yourself and tell us what we're really discussing tonight, what it means, and why it's important?
Sure. I will try to answer at least two of those three things. We're talking about media networking. My background has always followed a bit of audio stuff. So I was a DJ for a while, really liked DJing, really liked doing that, having fun, partying, etc.
We're going to have to talk about that later.
We're going to talk about DJing?
You didn't bring that up
until now. I was just a DJ once upon a time. Didn't know that.
No big deal.
Oh, no big deal. Yeah. So the audio stuff has always been like a hobby, right? And so the challenge in that is like, okay, so the hobby is great, but I need to make more money. So let me figure out this engineering and networking thing. I got into tech a long time ago. And kind of like, how can I kind of blend what I like on the audio stuff, but also do networking and, some computer science-y tech stuff. And early 2000s, right, Cisco came along and says, hey, we're going to do this thing called voice on networks. They bought a company at the time. They're like, and the VAR that I was working at, just doing, basic server admin type stuff. They're like, hey, you want to go learn, Cisco voice? I was like, sure, that sounds fun. It's audio. How can I blend some of that? And so that kind of kicked it off, right? How can I put audio and learn how to deal with phones, deal with audio inputs onto networks and get that stuff converted into wonderful IP packets. That's been kind of the career kickstart, was like, so I kind of followed audio and then later video as, bandwidths went up, Ethernet speeds went up. It's like, now we can do more video and video and video. So I kind of have just been following that. That's kind of a, short story, origin story of how I got into voice and video. Of course, did the Cisco collaboration thing for a long time. And then now it's kind of pivoting a little bit again, right? There is a broadcast TV industry that has been around a lot longer than Ethernet's been around. We're talking, 1940s, right? When NBC and CBS got started and how they did analog video, et cetera. Then along came digital video in like 1989, 1990, when those standards got written and everything went digital. So now we've had digital video, we've had digital audio for many, many years. And the next pivot that's happening is, okay, cool. How do I get away from even the digital video and just use Ethernet and IP networking for everything? That's the topic.
So currently, or at least I guess up until recently, Ethernet was not being used to carry that data, at least broadcast TV stuff?
You're right. It was not. So SDI has been around a while from a digital video perspective. And so if you see a lot of like the cable picture stuff from like the Reddit threads and stuff like that, of like the massive amount of cables that are like in a rack, you're talking thousands of cables. A lot of times it's actually video distribution cables. Could be camera networks, could be video distribution, because it's not an Ethernet switch that's doing all that stuff. It's usually a back of a video router when you see like the 1024 cables plugged into a rack. That's SDI, that's digital video. And so the pivot is, okay, cool, SDI has been great, but now the bandwidth requests are going up even more. SDI was like at 1.3 gig. I'm going to get all this math wrong. So if anybody wants to fact check me while we're talking, that's totally fine. I'm going to get all the math wrong, and probably intentionally.
I'm going to Google it right now. Let's go.
So SDI, right, uncompressed video is 1.3, 1.4 gigabit per second. And so you already can hear the problem of that trying to put that on Ethernet, right? That's faster than a 1 gig Ethernet port. So video and SDI video has been around a long time, and it's probably not going away anytime soon. But how can we start leveraging faster Ethernet speeds to pivot over to Ethernet? And that's what the broadcast industry is challenged with right now. I was fortunate enough to make it out to NAB show this year. NAB show is probably like 3 times the size of Cisco Live. They fill out the entire Las Vegas Convention Center. All 3, north, south, east, west wings of Las Vegas Convention Center. Wow. And the common theme at NAB show this year was definitely continuing down the path of, well, how do I put all this stuff on a network, right? Servers with network ports, servers with GPUs running network ports. And they're not shy about how fast they need to go either. They're talking, 100 gig Ethernet ports, right? They're like, why don't we just go all the way fast so we don't have to have this conversation again?
What are the limits of SDI? I assume we're hitting up against limits of SDI. Mm-hmm. And that's the reason for doing this, right? So do you, I don't mean to quiz you, but I'm just curious.
Quiz.
What are the
I'll
limits?
try.
Like, do you know the limit of SDI? Like, at what point can you say, okay, this will not travel well over SDI? We can't use it.
Yeah. So SDI has generationally been a thing, right? So they started HD SDI, then we had, I think it's 6G SDI, and then 12G SDI, and then 24. So those are measurements of the gigabit per second. So they also had some concepts of like, how can I do dual cable SDI, right? How basically, well, I'm gonna say it wrong again. It's not multi-channel Ethernet or a lag or a trunk port, right? But it's a similar concept of let me put it on 2 cables instead of 1 cable, and then they've done that a couple times. So we're reaching like a limit, absolutely, of bandwidth and just ability to not only push the bandwidth, but also all the additional metadata that I now need to send. Like we're familiar with Netflix and the YouTube's trying to do HDR content or Dolby Vision or, that high extra color bandwidth. All of that's more data, right? So we're definitely pushing the limits when it comes to what SDI can provide for us. It's not going away anytime soon, right? I mean, there's still like a broadcast standard to reach the masses, right? We're not all going to get 4K video. Everybody that's still getting their TV over antennas, right? That's going to be a thing for a very, very long time because of just the way the world works. So we still need to meet those needs, and those needs can easily be met with SDI. We've been meeting those forever. But in the newer HDR, 4K, maybe even 8K down the road, right? That's going to be a lot more bandwidth required.
So you mentioned the big challenge is bandwidth. So it's pushing us from these localized digital media cabling and switching to Ethernet and IP networks. So you're taking an industry to traditional data networking that's never seen that before, or at least to the scale that most enterprises use it at. So that's, to me, that's screaming skills gap. So you have a need for networking minded people, network admins, network engineers into the video space, but they kind of need to be able to speak some of that video language as well. So how do we get those network-minded people into these media networks?
You're right. That's a big question mark right now. I think a lot of companies and TV stations and broadcast stations are trying to figure this out right now, right? I mean, the standard's relatively new, right? I mean, just because the standard gets written doesn't mean it's going to happen the first year, right? It's going to take some time for it to get productized into stuff, actually in the field. It's wrong the first time. There's a whole life cycle of this stuff. So we're really reaching a point where those skill gaps are getting challenged. So we've got a lot of broadcast engineers and AV enterprise engineers that are trying to learn more networking. And we've got a lot of network engineers that are trying to learn more broadcast. It's like a lingo problem too. I mean, that industry's got so many more acronyms than you think networking has. It's amazing.
Who do you think is going to have the hardest time like crossing over network engineers into broadcast or broadcast into networking?
Oh man. So I'm going to tell on myself right now. I'm having a challenge learning the broadcast stuff. I think it's going to be easier for the broadcast community to learn network engineering, quite honestly.
Now, why do you think
easier, not necessarily correct?
Wait, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah. So if you want to, I think it needs to be a dual role in the future. Instead of saying, hey, a broadcast engineer has to know everything, right? How do we embed a second or a third person that knows the specific skill set, right? We're getting into this too much knowledge domain problem. It's almost like saying, I know everything about cybersecurity. That's not a thing, right? It's like saying, I know everything about broadcast engineering is not a thing, right? It's like, I know the broadcast engineering side, and then we need to, or AV engineering, and I need to add in a network and then also a cybersecurity person into the conversation, right? Yeah, somebody just said it in chat. Yeah, you're right. It's a lot more cost. It is driving up the cost by adding people into the conversation, but I think a lot of the companies that are doing this have the dollars to spend on it. We're talking some pretty big media conglomerates, and they get a lot of advertising revenue.
I can almost see, though, companies more than maybe like hiring extra people, potentially actually like asking their current people to start expanding their skill sets. Is that something that lines up with your experience so far, or? It
does, yeah. So at I guess I'll give an experience from NAB show. I actually put on a vendor shirt and stood in their booth and kind of, talked about people coming up and talking about this stuff. It was a networking company, and there were a lot of broadcast engineers coming up going, hey, where do I even start learning Ethernet and IP? That was a very, very common conversation because they've got the background, right? They know how to sit in the control room and go live and do stuff like that and do what they do. I don't know what they do. I haven't done what they've done, so I can't elaborate on that. But they're asking that for sure because that is what's happening. You're exactly right. The companies are going, hey, look, we're making this pivot over to IT infrastructure, servers, routers, switches. You need to start learning that. And I feel like that's a problem that companies are putting on people, right? I don't know how we're supposed to know everything.
Yeah, honestly, it kind of smacks of the you got to learn automation now thing.
I was just going to say that.
Sorry.
No. I love
right.
that we're thinking the same thing because I'm drawing a very similar parallel from broadcast engineering people having to learn networking to network engineers having to learn things like automation and cloud. Yeah. It's just different problems, but a lot of similarities, it seems.
Oh yeah, go automate everything tomorrow. You can do that by next week, right? Yeah. That's so you're absolutely right. It's becoming a too much knowledge domain problem, and I think companies are going to have to start addressing it legitimately because you're going to start running into personality problems of the engineers that haven't learned yet to say no. That's not what I know, and I don't have time to go and learn that. People want to think they can learn everything, and that's just going to be something we're going to have to address. So you're right. It's a skills gap problem, and that's kind of want to part of the reason to get on here and talk about it is like how do we go after it without saying, hey, you got to know everything.
Can we talk about some of the specific technologies that somebody who's a network engineer now maybe or getting into network engineering but is actually interested specifically in kind of plugging into the broadcast world or like the voice and video world? What kind of protocols, technologies, cert track, whatever, like what should they be looking at? Do you have like a list of things or any recommendations?
Yeah, I think a good recommendation is if you're already down the path with any sort of Cisco certification, there's some books that have been around a very long time about how to put voice on networks. The broadcast industry and even the radio broadcast industry did it before video broadcast industry did. So radio was very quick to pivot to this alongside voice, right? They were like, audio is easy, right? It's a 64K stream that I can drop on the network. No problem. I can do that all day long. So audio broadcasting and audio and phones on networks were definitely a thing first. So there's a lot of books that already exist on how to do that and how that works, right? How do I do packetization of voice into an IP packet, right? And how that process works. There is a CCNA, or I don't think it's called CCNA anymore, but there is a voice level 1 book, basically from Cisco Collaboration. That is, I think it's still a good entry point from a network engineer's perspective looking at this, because it's gonna give you some fundamental concepts, right, of like how this actually happens. And those same concepts, I think, translate to broadcast because it's still the same RTP packet, right, on the network. We're just doing it at a much higher bandwidth when it comes to video.
So we're talking about dropping these voice and video packets, these streams onto IP networks. Is this something that we're combining on traditional data networks? Or are we treating this kind of like OT and security camera networks where they're separate physical networks? What does that look like?
Yeah, and it depends on the venue, depends on the building. I'll give you an example of a live venue, sports venue, right? We can do, or it is possible to do that on one converged network when it comes to audio only. So if I'm talking about all of the digital signs, or you go to a baseball or football game, right, and you see all the signs that you walk out in the hallway and like, hey, there's the game on the screen, right? I can do all of the voice and video and the compressed stuff on one converged network. Where you can't do it on a converged network is when I go up into the broadcast booth and I need to get the broadcast cameras up into the control room and then out onto the scoreboards, right? That's the high bandwidth stuff that has to be a separate network because it just, you can't, it's too much bandwidth. I can't run that over a 1 gig network. And I'm probably not going to spend the money to run 100 gig for all of the stuff that doesn't need 100 gig throughout the whole venue. Even in an enterprise, it's usually a separate network. So if I'm doing digital signage or video distribution through the building, it's a lot of times a separate network. And the reason for that is it comes down to who wants to manage the gear, number one, and who wants to manage all the multicast required. It's all multicast we're talking about, right? It is a multicast network, 100%. And a lot of times, the engineers that are running the corporate network are like, no, you're not going to put that stuff on my network. Forget it. Just go build your own other network and go do that over there.
Every network engineer that I know loves multicast. It's their favorite kind of traffic. Yeah. Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. So everything we're talking about so far is multicast. 110%. Oof. Yeah. I mean, there's obviously some unicast when we're talking about just audio, but when we're talking about a video distribution, multicast.
So multicast would be a good thing. I assume like PIM and IGMP, like at least the basics, if not like
that is core.
Advanced stuff would be very, very good. Okay. Very good for people to study if they're interested in going this route with their network engineering. Okay. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, multicast and PIM and how to manage that on a network is essential. I would say that's one thing to help. Like when the AV integrator shows up at your building and wants to plug in a whole bunch of stuff that's your, AV tools or conference room stuff or whatever like that. It's super important to know what the multicast implications are because they're going to want to plug it into your network, and you better go. I either have a handle on this broadcast. Or I don't. Yeah.
When we talk about enterprise networks and creating these separate physical networks for media, for voice and video, if the traditional IT network teams aren't managing it, then who is? Is it typically integrators or just other, like we talked about the split between IT and OT. We've had a recent episode about that. Like who would be managing and maintaining these networks?
Well, it depends on the customer, right? Sometimes the integrator will come in and do the day 0, day 1, get it up and running. Everything looks great and just basically hand it back. It's not a network that's touched very often. I would say it doesn't have the same life cycle as a corporate network for desktop servers, et cetera. It probably has a much longer life cycle because it's very purpose built. And so I'm going to put it in the closet and it's going to do its job for moving video in my building probably for the next 5 to 7 years. So the IT team can patch it, secure it, and isolate it. But I don't need to go back to it very often. So some customers, it'll just get kind of handed back to them. In other cases, you're absolutely right. It may be the integrator that's going to do the day 2 support and just kind of care and feed. Again, it doesn't need a lot of care and feeding. It does need some from a security perspective. There's a variety of customers out there, right? Some folks want to take it on. Some folks don't want to take it on. But it is typically a separate video distribution. And, as we get into the, higher HDR/4K content, that wants to get pushed throughout a building, right? We're starting to build 10 gig networks. If I'm doing IPTV through a building or a prison, that's going to be a 10 gig network these days. And it's usually just got its own separate care and feeding.
Did you say a prison just there?
I did say a prison. Yeah, that's actually.
So are we talking like security cameras? Yeah.
No, we're talking about prisoners watching TV. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. So if I wanted to put TVs throughout an entire campus, it is a campus. It's a campus network. It's just a prison. It's a lot of TVs.
Interesting.
That was the next thing I wanted to talk about. Like, exactly. And on the enterprise side, we talked about things like stadiums and now prisons. But what are some of the other examples of enterprises that would have these things? And I think you just kind of answered this question in IPTV. Can you kind of get into IPTV, what the use cases are and why we would have a separate media network for IPTV?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thought process is, before this was landing on the Ethernet, right? I would run a coax distribution through my campus. It could be a college campus. It could be an education facility. That's one big concept for this, right? Of how do I get TV into all the dorm rooms, or TV into all of the classrooms that need to display the news. Before that was networked, right? That was a separate coax based, RG6 network that ran through everything. So instead of having that additional cable plant, well, let me just don't do that anymore and run it on Ethernet as well. This is another case where Ethernet is winning in a vertical, right? And so that's kind of concept. So education facilities, corporate distribution of TV. Like if I want to show a news channel in a break room, some of it isn't a lot of TVs, but IPTV has definitely been a driving force behind getting everything over to the network.
Would you say a lot of companies, the impression I've got is that we're in sort of this like in between area where we've got like older technologies being used to carry a lot of this, and we're trying to move towards the newer, relatively newer Ethernet. Would you say, I'm assuming the majority of like broadcasting companies and things like that are using older technology and slowly moving in the newer technology direction? Am I right about that? Is there a lot of like retrofitting happening, is what I'm getting at?
There's definitely a lot of retrofitting. There's a lot of converting going on. We talked about SDI earlier. SDI to IP converters are a huge thing right now. Of like, how do I get this existing stuff in a little box that converts it from SDI to IP? And that's all it does. You've got one video stream in one side and an IP stream out the other side. And how to bridge the gap is a big topic of conversation right now. There's a lot of use cases and studies going on of like what's actually cheaper in the long run. People are looking at the financial side. Nobody really knows because it's all getting productized right now and ship it, buy this. So it's like, I can't use the word exploding. I was told to stop using that because it implies violence. So there's an explosion of Ethernet happening. But yeah,
Ethernet-based violence. Sorry.
No, it's all good. So yeah, it is definitely a rapid expansion for some people. A lot of people are taking a pause and going, is this really financial, justifiable for our station, our local station group? Is there a reason to do this the way that we've been doing it this way for 40 years? So why do I need to switch, right? What is the real advantage to this? And the advantage to it long term is probably how content is going to become interactive. I think that's, a big change of like, hey, we've been delivering video content to you, but how do I start bringing in all the other content delivery streams and advertisers that are now all IP based into that, right? So the content delivery market is definitely driving a lot of this too. Of, hey, we need something newer, better, more modular, one way to say it, of how to get content and advertisements into that.
Leave it to the hyperscalers every time.
Yeah. Leave it to the hyperscalers.
And now a word from our sponsors.
Hey A1 fans, Unimus is an on-premise network automation and configuration management solution designed for fast deployment and ease of use. On top of disaster recovery and change management, Unimus also handles config auditing. The config search feature lets you easily look up and list all the devices in your network with a particular config. By querying command outputs from your devices at scale, Unimus also gives you visibility into the running state of your network. Interested in a device-agnostic NCM software to streamline and automate configuration management for your entire network? Check out Unimus. Now back to the show.
So are people building, still building SDI-based infrastructure, or is it mostly the new stuff being built is Ethernet, IP-based?
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of customers that are still building SDI infrastructure. And the reason for that is, number one, cost, right? It is a bit expensive at the moment, depending on who you ask, right? That I'm going to get somebody's going to come and tap on my shoulder. I said that, but depending on who you ask, the newer Ethernet infrastructure makes sense for maybe some larger customers, whereas a smaller station might need to stick with SDI because of cost, and that's what they know. They don't necessarily need to change, right? It's a what are the core business values that I'm getting out of this, instead of just changing just to change, right? That's like the whole automation story we just talked about. Do I really need to automate, or just need to hire a person to punch the buttons? Yeah.
That's fair. Yeah. I'm assuming it would be mainly fiber based stuff, and that can definitely be expensive. So that makes sense.
Yeah. I think the Ethernet market too is helping drive this, as it's now becoming cheaper to go faster. Right. It's like, we used to look at 1 gig to 10 gig was just expensive, right? The chips were not developed to go faster without spending a whole bunch more money. Now it's like 400 gig, no problem. 800 gig, no problem. Right. I can get 32 ports of 800 gig and 1 RU now. So why wouldn't I just go ahead and buy an 800 gig switch in 1 RU? As compared, and I think this is a good comparison too. I can get that much bandwidth in 1 RU in an Ethernet switch. To get that much bandwidth in a traditional video router is like half a rack, right? There's power economics problem. There's a cabling plant infrastructure. To get that much bandwidth in the same older form factor, you're talking a lot more physical space to make that happen. So a lot of economics are coming into play, and how can I go faster but not take over like another 10 racks of equipment?
Yeah. Okay. So you're an architect. Somebody comes up to you and says, retrofit my SDI based infrastructure. How do you in general go? What are the things that you have to think about there? What are the, gotchas with SDI going over to, IP based stuff? So
the gotchas would be, okay, what do you want to do with you have to evaluate or think about the cameras that are involved. You have to think about the video routers that are involved. You have to think about the control room and their workflows. When somebody goes live in a control room, right, it is a live production. There can be no problems. So there's even a standard written to duplicate the network for live broadcasts, right? Don't build just 2 of these or just 1 of these, build 2 of these. And we're going to put the video stream twice. When I talked about earlier, there was an older SDI standard that was like, let's put it on 2 wires instead of 1. Well, that still kind of permeates the solution. And it can drive up costs. So a lot of times we're talking budget and financials way early in the conversation of like, okay, look, this is how much it's going to cost. This is how much bandwidth is coming off the cameras. How's that going to impact all the port speeds that are needed? It's a pretty intense conversation because
are we talking potentially two completely separate active networks?
Yep.
Carrying the same data at the same time.
Carrying the exact same data at the same time. Exactly.
Interesting.
Just for the potential of any failure during a live broadcast, right? That second video stream is already being from the camera to the video router. I've already got a second network it's flowing through.
That's wild.
It's 2 data center networks.
Yeah, I was okay. So why that? Sorry, this is very interesting to me, right? Why take that approach for redundancy as opposed to like, lag or like, like redundancy in like smaller ways, more granular ways within the network, like, an active router and a standby route, that kind of a, concept. Why two whole separate networks?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know the core answer of why that standard was written. I would love to reach out to the people and go, why did you write that standard? This is 2 data center fabrics. And when we're talking about data center fabrics, we're talking about definitely 100 gig, like spine leaf fabrics, right? Typical data center spine leaf networks. They're not running VXLAN. They're not running EVPN or anything like that. It's basically a full layer 3 network from the port. So the port is actually a layer 3 port. Layer 3 all the way through the fabric. And the -7 standard is basically say, okay, build 2 of those. And the camera is going to plug into 2 different leaves. And the video router is going to plug into 2 different leaves. And it's going to be the same video stream across both of them. There's just a no tolerance for any problem.
It's just a resiliency thing, right? And I like drawing, and why I think, Lexi, I'm with you. Why I think this is, for like an enterprise networking person, why I think this is kind of crazy is, to me, drawing a parallel would be on a floor, on an access, you'd have multiple access layer closets, and you would have somebody's PC that has 2 NICs and plugged into, diverse switch stacks, essentially. But yeah, it sounds like it's just the like you said, there's just no tolerance for failure, and you need that level of resiliency in these kinds of networks.
Yeah. And I think it brings up a really good point back to the skills gap, right? The concepts that you just mentioned, right? Lag or LACP or having the ether channel conversation. Those are concepts that are new to the people that are doing those designs and those standards, right? They're not in the weeds every day of what that means and what that looks like. So it's, why don't I just build a second one, is probably the first generation of this problem. And then they're probably going to back down and say, well, if I want really redundancy at the access level, I can probably do this instead of 2 switches.
Yeah, I'm wondering if that's something that came from the old days before Ethernet even. Is
just cultural differences,
And it's really interesting to think about. But I can also see how for very, very, very critical networks, right? Like you're live. It also does kind of make sense to me in a way that like you would have 2 completely separate. It's an active, like, one fault tolerant network.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
And so, and I've got a great parallel to, some of the work that we've done with some very large sports jewel events, right? We've done some work with what was it? World Cup we were talking about earlier. We've done some work with Super Bowl. And we're doing some work with some tennis championships. And the idea is that there's 2 networks to run all of that. And there's probably 4 networks to backhaul of that back to between countries.
I was going to say, like, when it's something like the World Cup and it's like between countries and it's like
between
a ton of data
stadiums, between countries, a lot of networking happening on that.
Well, and are there challenges around, because those are live events, right? So are we streaming live media and recording at the same time? What is that like?
Absolutely. So it's all 100% live, right? So the camera feed is dropping onto the network, and then I've got recording solutions that are also on that spine leaf network. Those recording solutions not only capture the video, but they're also the way the servers also do the re-injection of all the graphics and all the scores, and everything that you see on TV is happening on the network. It's happening from servers with GPUs integrating with graphics. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big recording server and storage solution behind all of that. And all of that is another thing that's pivoting to Ethernet, right? This whole thing has not been Ethernet storage previously, right? The whole industry is making the change over to like an IT data center.
Well, let's dig into a live event like that a little more. So let's say you've got an American broadcasting company that is covering an event like that overseas. How do they do it? Are they shipping their own data center over there? How do they accomplish that?
So there is a concept of remote production, right? We're not going to not have everything distributed from the remote country, right? We're going to ship the data back to probably a remote production facility or central control room, wherever the production company exists. So one of the things that we've done, and we showcased a little bit of this at NAB show, was that our concept of putting a media fabric or data center fabric into a shipping container so that we could actually get that to a country like Qatar or Australia or wherever these events are happening, right? And one of the things that was pretty neat, we kind of developed a folding rack solution because there is a height limit to put racks on or things on an airplane. So if we needed to fly it somewhere, we actually needed to fold the rack in half and then encapsulate it in a box so that we could push it onto an airplane and send it somewhere.
Wait, is this a rack that has like networking equipment already installed, and it's just
yes.
like we're just boop sticking it on an airplane?
Yep, absolutely. Wow. So it's 2 data centers, right? It's redundant fabrics, redundant everything. But it folds in half. Put it on a container. We can push it on an airplane. We can push it on a shipping container. Ship it anywhere around the world.
Data center
yes, I saw it in chat. It's very robust.
Yeah.
But it's a fun.
So you've got your data center that you've shipped overseas, right? Sitting in Qatar, wherever.
Yep.
How does the data actually get back to where it needs to go, get broadcasted everywhere? Are you using like satellites and RF? Are you, is it going over like an oceanic backbone? Like how does all that work? Does it just depend on the company or
a little bit of the company, right? Depending on who's doing the event. I will say that most of that is oceanic backbone, right? We're doing this at probably 100 gig speeds on private backbones. There may be 400 to 800 gig worth of traffic coming from an event like the World Cup. All of the camera feeds, everything is getting brought back into a central location for then distribution in the country, right? Or it may be sent to other countries for their own distribution. It may cross countries to go back to another country. It all depends on the company, right? And how they want to take the feeds from something like that and then send it out over their, antennas. That's a way oversimplification of it. A lot of networking.
I mean, yeah, that's always what it has to be, unless we want to do a deep dive into every little detail.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Let's kind of go back to we were talking about that skills gap in traditional like broadcast engineers that are wanting to learn networking. Let's go the other way. Let's talk about network engineers that maybe need to learn more about these media applications. And I'm kind of selfishly asking this a little bit as somebody who's trying to understand a little more about collaboration. Do network engineers need to learn about the intricacies of things like codecs and encoding and decoding? And the main reason I ask this is I recently took an intro to like collaboration course, and I was all about it until it got into codecs and my brain freaking melted. And I'm like, so how prevalent are things like codecs and encoding and decoding for network engineers to be able to learn some of these media concepts?
How much of a nerd do you want to be? Right?
Okay, come on. We're on a podcast called The Art of Network Engineering. That is your answer.
I think learning about the encoding and decoding side of it, like how the video is actually turning into an IP packet is important. Like if you want to deep dive into any sort of troubleshooting perspective, then you're probably going to need to know some of that. And specifically, we're talking about when I'm thinking codecs. Let's clarify what we're talking about here, right? I'm thinking of things like AV1. I'm thinking of Opus. I'm thinking of HVEC or MPEG. So those are, or JXS, which is JPEG XS, right? So those are encoding strategies for taking the video and audio, compressing them if I need to at some level, and then turning them into an IP packet. I think understanding the codec process and what the codec has to do all of that work will make you super dangerous in the conversation. Somebody mentioned in chat, it's
I was afraid you were going to
equipment.
say that.
Yeah. No, it's not. So it's definitely not learning the software development side. I'm not saying go to the GitHub repo and learn how to read the C and understand that, but understanding the concept of how that codec and what that codec needs to operate is probably the critical piece. Do I need a GPU and a server, or can it be done on an Intel processor, or can it be done with a DSP and a router? Those are where the codecs have the capability to operate. Hardware goes faster, right? I can do a lot of things in software, but when it comes to video compression and decompression, I probably need a piece of hardware to do that. One of the big things, I used to run a series called Codec Wars, and I think I had that in the notes earlier. There's a couple prevalent codecs that are kind of taking the lead. And it's really following the open source tradition. I think we all know and see that open source kind of wins a lot of times in the end. So anything open source, I don't have to pay licensing, probably a good thing. AV1 is probably heading that direction of being more of the winning codecs out there. If I can compress and decompress and I don't have to pay a license fee to 20 companies that own the old stuff, that's great. Instagram recently converted over to AV1 for their reels, right? So anytime you watch an Instagram reel, that's an AV1 decode on your phone. And that happened because folks like Apple and Intel put AV1 decoding in their processors. So AV1's a huge conversation right now.
Just real quick for my own edification, I'm trying to, so I'm deep into Ethernet right now. I'm trying to sort of relate this to the encoding that happens with Ethernet frames, right? Because depending on your flavor of Ethernet, you have a different kind of encoding. So I'm trying to figure out like at what level of the OSI model maybe does this encoding happen for like video audio compression? I
forgot my OSI model, so forgive me on that one. Above transport. So yeah, the encoding.
Okay, so it's higher than layer 4. Okay, so I was wondering if it was like maybe is this a presentation layer or whatever the useless ones above? You know, is this one of those layers as opposed to the lower layer like layer 2 encoding that Ethernet?
It's higher up. So session establishment would relate to things like SIP and SIP TLS. Session establishment would also be like HLS, or how I'm doing RTMP out to YouTube or this platform that we're on right now, right? That's more of like a streaming session enablement. The video encoding and audio encoding happens before that, right? I've got to turn it into a piece of data before I wrap it into some sort of session creation, and then it goes down stack.
Okay, so you've got like your application recording this stuff, then it's compressed at some point after that in one of those crazy layers, and then you've got the transport layer, and then you've got it's further encapsulated until you get down to Ethernet, and then finally it's sent over as bits. Is that like a very quick okay?
Absolutely,
that's fairly accurate. Cool. All right, my brain feels better now. Thank you.
Now, if you really want to take another deep dive on this, there is a layer 2 video standard called AVB, and there is an AVB working group, 802.working group for AVB. And their goal is to do a little bit lower OSI layer of what we're talking about, right? How do I do media transport? How do I do timing? How do I do all of those things maybe closer to that transport and layer 2 aspect of this? AVB has been around a long time. There's actually a standard written on it. And that's a challenging conversation because there's a lot of products out there that rely on AVB right now. I don't think this is personal opinion. I don't think we necessarily need AVB at that level anymore because there's just so much more robustness now higher up. I don't need to do it at layer 2 anymore. I just don't need to. I need it above layer 3 so I can route the thing and so I can multicast the thing. I don't need it talking Ethernet frames. Personal opinion. Sorry for anyone that's in the 802 working group on that. Yeah, let's let the switches alone. Yeah, I totally agree with that chat message. Let the switches be switches. We don't necessarily need them doing this other stuff too, right?
So along the skills vein, let's say I'm an enterprise network. I've got a completely separate physical network for my media.
Mm-hmm.
It's all on its own, 100 gig backbone, all that good stuff. That means I don't have to care about QoS anymore, right? And if I do, how do I care about it when it's all media? It all needs priority. It all needs preference. Tell us about QoS in media networks, Josh.
You're bringing up the QoS thing. I was hoping we were going to dodge the QoS thing, but hey, that's okay. We're here now.
Without it, yeah.
So one of the things, obviously, being media networking guy over the years, has been a lot of QoS conversations. This comes up all the time. Do we need it? Do we not need it? I would say in a lot of circumstances 10 years ago, absolutely, 100%, right? I'm trying to put everything on the network. Everything is 1 gig. I need a way to prioritize even a 10 voice streams over an Ethernet port. Now that it's at 10 gig and 100 gig and above, it's becoming less of a priority, but you're going to get my personal opinion. My personal opinion is, yes, you do need it in all cases, but you need to do it right. Bad QoS is worse than no QoS. Right? You've got a lot of control traffic that's happening on your network that probably needs some level of prioritization, and it might not hurt to put that in a priority queue.
Can we quote you on that? Bad QoS is better than no QoS?
Yes.
I would like to tweet that.
I'm going to use it. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I even said it wrong. But hey, the idea is right. You got to think about the traffic types on the network for sure. And if you've got control traffic, you absolutely have control traffic on your network. How your switches talk to one another is over a control plane. Are you prioritizing that and making sure that any bandwidth oversubscription is not crushing your control plane? I'm going to get so beat up on this, by the way. Please feel free to tweet me at Warcop and say, oh my gosh, he's saying you probably need QoS.
Now, when you've got a network like that and you're hosting like this huge event, like for example, the Super Bowl, and it happens once a year or whatever, it's not happening all the time. Mm-hmm. Do you make specific changes to the network for that specific event and then roll them back later? Or how do you just expect that? Is the network designed so that at any point, technically it could host a Super Bowl and be fine? Or like what are the preparations for something like that besides like shipping your data center places?
Yeah, so the in-venue network, so like what's in a stadium or what's in a sports venue, something like that, right? That doesn't change very often, right? How the video gets to all the screens, how the phones work, how the scoreboard works, that's all fixed. That's not going to change. It's set up for multiple events. Just it's not the Super Bowl, but hey, I'm going to have a football game here in every few weeks, right? I'm going to have a concert here. I'm going to have all of these different things, right? The venue has to make, they're in business to have events, right? So they've got to keep doing stuff. So the in-venue stuff doesn't change that much. What happens for a live broadcast is all the trucks roll in the back. And so now I've got to hook the internal network out to all of the broadcast takers that are in the back parking lot. And so that used to be like running a whole, well, it still is. Let me clarify. It's still a lot of cables, right? Cables going out the back door or going out into the broadcast slot, cables everywhere, right? If you want these different feeds, I've got to give you 5 cables to do this. How the conversation is going is now I can run a couple of fiber connections out to you that may be 25 gig, 100 gig, and you can kind of pick it like a channel on your TV. Like, what feed do I want? I don't have to give it to you all on separate cables. I can give you an Ethernet connection, and you can view all the multicast streams in your truck. And then you can do whatever you want to from there. Send it out on satellite, send it out on another network, et cetera, et cetera. So the in-venue to the external venue is definitely becoming more Ethernet too. Less cables to worry about. And in some cases, even more redundancy because I can do it all on 2 cables for all the feeds that are coming out of the venue.
That's another advantage of moving to Ethernet, huh?
Yeah. So there's some flexibility there, and there's also just the reduction in time to set up and tear down. Right? If I had a truck roll in and they needed everything from the venue, that might have been 20, that might have been 40 cables that someone has to patch in. And you're talking about all the network takers out back. So you're talking hundreds and hundreds of cables and hours of just patching things down. So It's better now if we can go to Ethernet and just say, here's 2 fiber connections. You pick whatever you want off of them.
Now,
or
this
more.
is a dumb question, probably, but like when you say takers, right, out back, who do you mean specifically? Like news trucks or who's doing this?
Yeah, so news trucks or broadcast channels. Let's say there might be a BBC truck, right, in an American sports event, right, because they're going to get some rights to play stuff on their network in the EU, or any of the regional takers that are going to be, rebroadcasting into their network, and making sure it goes out on the antenna in the regional markets, right? All of those are kind of like takers, I would say. It may be like we talked about earlier, maybe like an ABC or NBC or CBS that's doing a lot of this. Might be a Fox that's doing a lot of this. Those 3-letter media companies are pretty big at all this stuff. And they've got their own regional networks that need to receive all the content. So how all of that gets meshed around, I really don't know that much about it. I just know that there's a cable that goes from a camera out to a truck, and then it goes into the ether.
It goes in the air. Okay.
Yeah, it goes in the air at that point.
I never knew exactly
we're so
how that happened.
We're so kind with our words in IT, right? Everybody's either a user or a taker. It's just, I love the verbiage we use.
Oh yeah,
that's a good point. I never thought about that.
Yeah. I didn't want to let this episode finish without talking about this, Josh. Should we talk about digital signage in different streams that go into that? So there is this magical, mythical sphere looking thing that's getting built out in the desert in Vegas.
There is.
What is this thing?
There is a
magical how is it pushing these pretty pictures out around the sphere?
Oh, that's great. So the sphere lit up this week, right? I mean, it was like a July 4th thing. They turned on the Hello World, and now it's this orb of delightfulness in Vegas. They're
going to ask the rights to that phrase too. The
official name,
delightfulness.
So that is a very large digital sign. Very, very large digital sign. It has some relation to, like, if you've been into a large sports venue, like the scoreboard that's in the middle of the arena. We've all seen those, right? The halos and there's like the big signs that go all the way around the arena. It has some relation to that. What drives that and those signs or big scoreboards is definitely a data center network, high bandwidth multicast data center. There's just so many pixels involved and so many video streams involved that I'm talking several thousand multicast streams, right, to power something like that, right? It's not one multicast stream. I've got to send timed synchronized video to all of these pixels that are on the external of a sign. It's a lot of data, right? A lot of color data, a lot of things.
The timed aspect of that interests me. How do you achieve precision timing like that? I'm super curious.
Yeah, time is hard. We could have a whole episode of time. We can go timey-wimey, space and time, quantum
working
physics.
With rockets. Yep. Mm-hmm. It's hard.
So the time is definitely precision time protocol, PTP. PTP is a huge thing. All of this definitely has to be done with timing involved as well. And that's a lot of times why it's a separate network, is people don't want to put PTP on their corporate network. They're like, no, I'm not doing that. You're crazy. So PTP v2 is definitely a thing. And the synchronization of that network is, I would say, critical. And how to get all of those packets to those pixels at a perfect time is 100% a thing. And that's definitely PTP on a data center fabric. It's a leaf spine data center fabric, and PTP drives it all.
That's awesome. So interesting.
Yeah,
I don't know
a whole lot of details about the sphere right now. I would like to get some more details of that in the future. I don't know, exactly how many leaves or, how many multi-class flows it is, but it's very large.
Are you connected to people? Like, if we wanted to ask someone specific things about the sphere, do you know anyone?
I do, but they can't talk about it yet.
Okay,
I was going to say, how much can really be divulged? Yeah.
I'd love to do a Q&A.
Yeah. They do. There will definitely be some marketing around it for sure. Once the time is right, probably once the venue goes live and U2's playing and they're like, hey, it's, U2's first concert, whatever. I'm sure they'll do some marketing around it around that time. But it's a data center fabric, so take your pick.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's start to kind of round this out. Josh, you wanted to have this episode to really show people that there's a whole nother world out there to networking, these media networks. Mm-hmm. What would you say to, let's talk about the two different scenarios. What is some advice you would give to the broadcast engineer that needs to start learning networking or wants to start learning networking? And then what would you say to that network engineer that sees an opening and wants to be able to provide those networking skill sets into the traditional broadcasting world?
Yeah, I'll start with the broadcast and the AV side. I think starting at the fundamental levels with a non-vendor specific certification is a great place to start, right? Learning Ethernet, learning Network Plus may be a good path. Even the CCNA or JNCIA, I think I said that right. Or even some of the early Arista certifications would be a good starting place to kind of understand not only from Cisco's perspective, how to put voice on a network and do some collaboration concepts, but also bleeding into data center infrastructure. Not all of the data center products. This is a very subset of a niche world, right? So we're not talking about learning all of Arista data center networking or all of Cisco data center networking or all of Juniper data center networking. That's not the thing. It's just, how do I do high bandwidth multicast on data center switches? That's the thing. So yeah, I mean, starting from like a Cisco CCNA level is a huge leap forward, I think. I say that because I think CCNA is a little bit less vendor focused than I think they get credit for sometimes. So I think that's a good starting place. I mean, they've been doing it for years, right? 30 plus years of trying to teach this stuff. So that's a good starting point. I actually positioned that a lot at NAB show a few months ago. I was like, hey, just go after some CCNA networking stuff. That's a great starting point to learn, core concepts. And I definitely mentioned that a lot.
Good advice.
So
cool.
Network engineers learning AV stuff, that's a bit of a challenge. If you're not in a business or integrator that's actively doing that on your own is a bit of a challenge for sure. Right. If you don't have the gear and you don't have access to the gear, it's kind of like that old age problem of I don't have the stuff, right? How do I learn it?
What about, would you recommend they become DJs to learn that stuff?
Be a DJ.
Is that helpful? Yeah.
Learning the anxiety of being live. How about that? That is, make some network engineers do more live podcasts. There you go. And help them understand that, look, this thing's live. You can't have a problem. That's not even a remote possibility. So understanding of how to build in redundancies, I would say, is a huge part of this too. Like, and not be crazy about redundancies, but some level of understanding of what do I do if something fails. There's a lot happening in the communities. I would say a great place to go for network engineers that want to dive into like a community side of this would be like the video engineering community that was, I think they're still propped up off Reddit. That's a huge conversation topic right now. But if you go look for the video engineering community and if you go look for the AV integrator community, that is a great place to hang out and kind of start learning the lingo of what in the world all of these folks are talking about. That's what I've been doing. My background's not broadcast at all, right? So I've been kind of hanging out in the community and jumping on, the channels and just jumping in and going, hey, what are you doing? What are we talking about today? And just trying to like learn some new stuff. I think that's a good way to go about it. Just to get some of the core concepts down. And I was looking over my Discord as I said that to make sure I got all of that right. I was like, is there any other community?
Oh, you mentioned the NAV show, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm not sure we actually said what that is. Can you just briefly explain what that is?
Yeah. So NAB show is basically I think I'm even going to mess this up. North American Broadcasters or National Association of Broadcasters. I think that's what it is. I'm going to get beat up for not knowing
so it's
that off the top of my
America.
head.
It's the US specific, I think.
NAB
National.
It doesn't even say on their website immediately.
National Association of Broadcasters.
Thank you. All right, I'm gonna get so hit over the head.
So it's their con. It's like their Cisco Live, but for the NAV. Okay,
yeah, exactly.
So would you recommend that as like an event for a network engineer who's really interested in this stuff, or do you need to be plugged in already to that community?
I think it's so I went the first time this year. I think it was very eye opening to see like a different take and different concepts and kind of what's happening in the industry. If you want to dive into like what's happening with the standards, I'm going to give you some acronyms. Here we go. SMPTE or SMPTE. That's a big standards body that's driving a lot of this. VSF is another one, and JT-NM. Those are 3 different worlds of things you can go learn and read about from a broadcast engineering perspective. They've got some great content. Some of that content is gated, but going to NAB and sitting and seeing it like firsthand, I think is awesome. It was it was well worth, the dollars that I spent to go out there and say, hey, I really want to learn this stuff. Let me go sit in these sessions that I have no idea what you're talking about and just start, learning from scratch. That's what I've been doing. Just learn from scratch. I kind of get a little bit of a background though, so I guess I'm not really learning from scratch because a lot of the concepts kind of bleed over. But yeah, I think something like NAB and going to getting some more video specific training is definitely available to you.
Okay,
awesome. So Josh, what maybe did we not cover that you think we should have hit in this one?
Let's take a look here. We did talk more about the broadcast side. I think that bleeds a lot more over into like the enterprise AV integrator world. So like, conference room stuff and talking about like Microsoft Teams on networks or, WebEx on networks or Zoom on networks, all of that is also video on networks, right? And that even brings us back to the QoS conversation. Like, do I need QoS on the desktop? All of those core concepts are translated, right? Just different verticals. If I'm an enterprise person, I'm probably doing video through desktop collaboration or through a piece of conference room equipment. We didn't touch on a lot of that. A lot of that is becoming a lot more robust and a lot more commoditized. So for me personally, it's a little bit less interesting now because it's just like, get out of the box, plug it up, connect to the cloud, and you have video, right?
Sorry, speaking on, it just occurred to me, speaking on like the topic of getting introduced to like the big broadcasting type stuff, would you consider like working at maybe an enterprise, but that has a lot of this video and some audio stuff going on, a decent introduction into that world to sort of slide in a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're in an enterprise, you likely have an AV person or lead, right? They may not be reporting into IT, but they may not be even connected to IT in a lot of ways. But you probably have an AV person that manages your conference rooms. That is a great place to go talk. Go talk about what's happening over in, what are you doing for digital signage? How are you doing video distribution in our building? How are you doing conferencing collaboration in all of our conference rooms? And then you probably have some conference rooms and maybe even some boardrooms, depending on your company, that has an AV rack. Go open the door and look at it. There is a whole lot of stuff in there that is not on your corporate network. And that is a great place to start. And just go, hey, I see all these Ethernet cables. What does that do? And then, kind of learn from there, right? There's some encoders and decoders in there. For video distribution, and just that's a great, definitely doorstep or introduction to it. Is you've got an AV rack in your building somewhere. Go take a look at it.
Cool. Okay, so make friends with your AV person. Awesome.
Make friends. Yeah, we definitely did not talk about how to not hate your AV people. And well, actually, we did. It was learn multicast.
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
If you learn multicast, you will make friends with your AV people. Absolutely.
So Josh, where can people continue the conversation with you? Where can you be found on the internet?
So I can be found mostly on Twitter at Warcop or on Blue Sky at warcop.com. That's the two that I'm kind of leading with right now. You can definitely find me in the communities that I've mentioned earlier. Also in all of the network and art of network engineering community, you can hit me up there. I'm mostly leaning towards Twitter and like Discord communities right now. So feel free to ping me. I'm usually at Warcop somewhere in those. I don't know that I'm not that anywhere else.
Awesome. Lexi, any last minute things before we close?
No, this just like it was super fascinating for me. So
same.
Thank you so much, Josh. Like I've actually learned a lot, and it's making me a little nervous about not knowing much about multicast, but I'll get over that somehow. Yeah, this is super fascinating.
Yeah, it's fun. It's been fun for me to learn it too. It's kind of a pivot for me, and it's like, hey, this is actually happening, and there's some cool stuff going on.
Well, let this be a lesson to all of our listeners too. This episode happened because Josh reached out and thought that this would be a great thing to discuss and bring out so traditional network engineers know that this happens. I love what you said at the end there, in that I know each and every one of you in your enterprise networks has an AV rack somewhere. You just got to go find it. So if any of you have any show ideas that you would like to come on and have a show about, definitely let us know. You can find us on Twitter and multiple other social media platforms, typically at Art of Net Eng, on our website, artofnetworkengineering.com. Also check out Cables to Clouds, our other podcast all about going, the hybrid cloud environment. Check that out as well.
We're all everybody's on TikTok now. So A1 and Cables to Clouds have now. TikToks. Check us out. Just
Tim's like, oh no, not that thing.
Yep. I don't do TikTok, but I heard that I was the face of like our first TikTok. So
we have a great one of Tim doing an intro. It's really good. It's got musical background and everything. So go check it out.
So we are the TikTok now as well. You can find us anywhere. Thank you all for joining us. This has been another episode of The Art of Network Engineering. We'll see you later.
Hey there, friends. We hope you enjoyed listening to that episode just as much as we did recording it. If you want to hear more, make sure you subscribe to the show in your favorite podcatcher. You can also give that little bell rascal a little ringy-dingy so you know when we release new episodes. If you're social like we are, you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Art of Net Eng. That's Art of NETENG. You can also find us on that weaving web that is the internet at artofnetworkengineering.com. There you'll find our show notes and some blog articles from the hosts, guests, and other friends who just like getting their thoughts down on that virtual paper. Until next time, friends, thanks for listening.